The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Nut Job by Kurt Ringquist. I've been fascinated lately by early TV. What does the phrase early TV mean to you? To my kids, early TV might mean Seinfeld. Those with a more historic turn of mind might think My Mother the Car. Listen, by the time My Mother the Car was on, network television was a well-established religion. The show was in color, for crying out loud. Now some would say I Love Lucy and regale us with tales of how the New York City Water Commissioner could tell when the commercials were running during Lucy because the city's water pressure would drop precipitously as millions simultaneously flushed their toilets. One thing that always bothered me about this story is why would millions of people need to pee at the same time during I Love Lucy? Did this mean that everybody guzzled liquids during Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts, which aired just before? That's the real question here. Why the hell were people compelled to consume large quantities of fluid in order to stomach Arthur Godfrey and the Eisenhower-era equivalent of the contestants on America's Got Talent? Come to think of it, drinking heavily is the only way I could watch America's Got Talent, so I guess it's question asked and answered. Go back just a bit earlier and you'll hit upon the first really big smash hit for television, the first show that people talked about around the water cooler the next day at work. By the way, writers are still using this around the water cooler expression talking about popular shows today. Give it up, people. When was the last time you saw a group of office workers gathered around a water cooler? I believe the answer is about 1990. So unless you're writing about Magnum P.I., come up with something else, okay? And one more, by the way, a water fountain is called a bubbler in Rhode Island, just so you know. Now, this first big show was the Texaco Star Theater starring Milton Berle. We, and by we I mean I, complained about how stadiums are being named after companies instead of people or their actual locations now, like my favorite, the Dunkin' Donuts Center. But back in the old days, TV and radio shows were named after the companies that sponsored them and not their stars. The Jack Benny Show was actually called the Jell-O Program. But Milton Berle was huge and sold a lot of gas for Texaco. We are now all the way back to 1948, and you're thinking, we must be getting close to the early days of TV by now, as you slyly glance at your watch and remember that you're supposed to be taking the dog to get his nails clipped before the big dog show at the Dunkin' Donut Center, but we're not even close. The Texaco Star Theater's first season on NBC was 1948-49. You know what else NBC TV celebrated in 1949? Its 10th anniversary of regular broadcasting, that's what. Yep, the first official NBC broadcast was from the New York World's Fair in 1939. And the first star of the first broadcast was President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The first TV commercial was just 2 years later for Bulova watches in 1941. This was the beginning of commercial TV. But we'll go back further. Come with me in our little time machine, sponsored by X-Lax. Step in and settle comfortably in the rich Corinthian leather seats. Feel free to roll down the window if it gets too warm in the time machine. But don't touch that button, whatever you do, or we'll wind up back in the time of the dinosaurs and they'll hide the time machine while we're looking for water and it'll just be a big mess, okay? We're just going around the corner of the space-time continuum back to 1934 when a young man named Philo Farnsworth, who was, incredibly, born in a goddamn log cabin at a place called Indian Creek near Beaver, Utah. You cannot make this stuff up. Philo demonstrated TV as we know it today, except that Snooki from Jersey Shore was not on camera 7 days a week. What he was demonstrating was the capability of the cathode ray tube, or CRT, the same CRT that we used on our TV sets and in our offices as a computer monitor to give us headaches before LCDs and plasma sets took over just a couple of years ago. It was a good long run for Philo and his CRT. They gave us all the shows mentioned above and way more crap besides for more than 70 years. But Philo and his CRT replaced an even earlier form of TV, known as mechanical television. Get back in the time machine, hurry up, we don't have all day, don't crowd in so close, and please keep it down. If I have to stop this time machine because of you kids, I'm turning it around and we're going right back to 2011, I swear. We're heading all the way back to 1909, when a guy named Georges Reynaud and a buddy of his, A. Fournier, apparently A did not want to reveal his whole first name, probably because he was just there to give moral support to his crackpot friend and his stupid invention, transmitted the first television image in Paris. They had a bunch of very large equipment, so maybe A. Fournier just happened to own a van that Georges could borrow. We won't stay in 1909 long because we have to get to England in 1925, so back in the time machine. And no, we're not stopping along the way. You should have thought of that before we left the 21st century. The very first public demonstration of mechanical television was made by Scottish inventor John Logie Baird at Selfridge's department store in London on March 25, 1925. Silhouetted, still images were shown because the resolution, lighting, and sensitivity of the equipment and so on was not yet ready to pick up things like the difference between a mustache and a nose. And how were these pictures made, you ask? Because if you don't ask questions, I'm not taking you back to 2011. You can just stay in 1925 and explain to the shopkeepers why your money has signatures of people who aren't even born yet. The pictures were made using a thing called a Nipko disc, essentially a spinning disc with strategically placed holes which, when combined with a bright light and a bunch of electronic gadgetry, which today could fit on the head of a pin, but which in 1925 required a good-sized truck to haul around, created an orange image about the size of a poker chip for your viewing pleasure. Not too thrilled about watching a tiny orange silhouette through a magnifying glass? Well, since it's tiny and orange, you can pretend it's Snooki's silhouette, and maybe that will help. Things got better very quickly, to the point where just 2 years later, Bell Labs was able to broadcast a moving image with decent quality to a screen 24 inches by 30 inches with synchronized sound the same year that the first talking motion picture came out. Regular broadcasting began in England, Germany, Japan, France, and the United States shortly thereafter, and by the 1930s, very wealthy people could waste several hours a day, except Sundays and holidays, watching cabaret performers, reruns of old silent movies, sporting events, and the occasional original play made just for TV. I say very wealthy people because a 10-inch black and white TV in 1941 cost $375, or roughly $2,600 today. But that 1941 set was not mechanical. Philo Farnsworth and his CRT had put John Logie Baird and his spinning discs out of business by then. Get back in the time machine one last time, and now who spilled all these peanut shells all over the floor, for goodness sake? Settle down. We're going to make one more stop, December 7th, 1941, as the TV broadcast of a New York Rangers hockey game is interrupted by a special news bulletin. Japan has just bombed Pearl Harbor, and TV is about to come to a grinding halt for 5 years. During those 5 years, radar, not TV, will be where everybody puts their efforts, but the work on radar screens just makes TV that much better. Better picture, more reliable, and so, as we hover over 1946 and the beginnings of regularly scheduled network TV as we still know it today, shows like Let's Rumba and Boxing from Madison Square Garden, we say a fond farewell to early television. Our time machine comes to a screeching halt, I told you to use the seatbelts, back in the present, and we all pile out, and I'm sending you a bill for cleaning the peanut shells out of the back seat, knowing that our lives have been enriched through the history of the magic of television.